So I have this discussion with a friend of mine that was going on for a while, and it basically was, why is it that human beings are advanced at this point in time? Why is it that, back in the days of Egypt, they didn't build a rocket that could go to the moon, or a submarine, or any one of the amazing things that we have? Why didn't they have cars and all these different things? Now, to me, the answer seemed to be pretty obvious. It's oil and fossil fuels. That's the reason why we're that advanced. But my friend, I think that he's pretty smart. For him, that answer didn't seem to make sense. He was thinking that, we could have been similarly advanced, I suppose, to some degree, without having this huge energy source. So I immediately pointed to, of course, the fact that how are we going to be that advanced if we didn't have cars, petrol, gasoline to put into cars, to put into planes, to make plastics. To me, it was abundantly obvious that all of these things are because of oil. And if oil or fossil fuels, or when they disappear, we would be right back to where we started. We would go back to the Middle Ages of whatever period that might be, whether it's China or Europe or whatever. And further than that, I basically was saying, look, all you have to do is look at the world, and you see where it's really easy to get access to energy, like the developed world, to get access to gasoline or any kind of engines or whatever that use this energy. And then you compare it to a place like rural India, rural Africa, rural any third world country, and you see that they don't have as much access to energy, in terms of they might be burning wood in order to cook on the stove, or they might be burning dung, or they don't have tractors to use to do farming, etc. And for me, that's what I was saying. Another argument that we were having was that the fact that it has nothing to do with, there's this thing that my friend likes, governance. To me, there's an idea that if third world countries would just have better governance, then there'd be first world countries. And to me, that idea was ludicrous. It has nothing to do with governments. It has to do with wealth. It has to do with access to energy. So my friend, one of the things that he was saying was that, well, let's look in the past. And he was saying, well, let's look at when the industrial age started. And you could see that there was some level of industry that happened before there was any significant use of fossil fuels, is what he was telling me. And my thought is that, okay, then it was just whales. People were just using whale oil to do things that they decided to use, and maybe that's what got them started. Maybe it was always maybe coal was there to a certain extent. Maybe oil was always available to a certain extent, but people didn't really use it that much until they started using, boiling blubber and using it in lamps to be able to stay up late. And then from that point, they maybe made an extrapolation and said, hey, well, there are these other things that we can use to have lamps at night as well, like propane and all of this other stuff. And I was saying to him that, hey, more than likely what saved the whales was all of this propane that was used, propane and all the other things that were available, more readily available. The oil that was oozing up, and maybe the coal that was readily available to be burned, maybe. And just as I was saying, when I did the research to look at it, you could see that, one of the first things that happened is that people started consuming whales at a faster and faster and faster rate. And of course, at some point, the whales, their populations diminished drastically. And at some point, they had to come up with some other means of energy because there weren't that many whales. I mean, if anybody is aware, if they're old enough and they're aware, they'd realize that many whales almost went extinct because people were using so much whale oil for lamps and for soaps and for making all sorts of different things and using that energy. So my friend was like, well, maybe that's the case, but he still believes that there would be some sort of complexity, that it was because of our ability to organize that, okay, maybe we might not have gotten all the way to the moon without fossil fuels, but we certainly would have been more advanced because there was more scientific inquiry, and as a result of that, we were advancing. And I don't really believe it. I think that in order to leverage the scientific inquiry that we were making, you need energy. You need energy in order to be able to leverage a lot of this knowledge. I mean, we can understand how to use levers, or pulleys, or all these different things, but somebody still needs to pull it, whether it's oxen or other people in forms of slaves or anything like that. And as a matter of fact, when you get down to it, that might have been the reason why slavery ended, because people were seeing that, okay, we can build a machine that can do the work of so many people that we don't really need to have slaves anymore. It's the same way that 80% of the people used to be involved in agriculture before the Industrial Revolution, and now in many places, especially in the developed world, it's like 2%, because we still do have perhaps 80% of the energy maybe being used to grow crops and so on. Well, not really, and it's probably not 80%, because with all the driving that we do, there's no way that that would have translated to any number of slaves or people riding around on horses. But certainly there's a vast amount of energy that is used in terms of making fertilizers and making food for livestock, and even for making the antibiotics that all of these all of these animals would be consuming. They say that 80% of the antibiotics are actually consumed by chickens, cows, pigs, whatever. And making antibiotics is a very labor intensive, it's a very polluting industry, as a matter of fact. So there's still a lot of energy and production that goes towards farming. As it turns out, the fact that so many of us are no longer involved in farming, it means that we have a lot of time now to spend driving around and doing all these other things that are not related to farming. But like I said, my friend still doesn't believe me completely that it was energy. That's why we are going to, we have probes that are going to Mars now, as opposed to 2,000 years ago when it's the same planet and we haven't evolved to be any smarter. But I think that it is best, we can see that you need a certain amount, there's a high energy requirement to complexity. We can see that well when you look at cells, like living cells. Many multicellular organisms, or most multicellular organisms, have many of these little organelles that are called mitochondria. And the mitochondria are called the powerhouse of the cell. One of the things that I was really surprised to learn a number of years ago is just the vast difference in size between single-celled organisms compared to a living cell like in a human body or a plant cell or something like that. It's a huge, I think either hundreds or thousands of times bigger than a bacteria is what a multicellular organism cell can be like. And the reason why it can be that much bigger is because there are all of these mitochondria that are in the cell that are like powering each part of the cell. So the idea is that by having these power plants inside of this cell, the cell can be a lot bigger. It's as if there are a bunch of different single cell organisms that gathered themselves together to make a multi-cellular organism cell. So it's a eukaryotes as opposed to prokaryotes, I believe that it is. So the eukaryotes are the bigger cells in our bodies, for example, and in plants. But before I go too far into this whole thing about cells, to me it's the same thing that you can see. With more energy, you're able to create something that is a lot more complex, a lot more complicated. And the energy source that we have for the most part in modern times is fossil fuels, which cavemen didn't have access to. People in Rome, I think they used a little bit of like windmills, and maybe they used coal to an extent, but they didn't mine coal, and they certainly didn't have oil wells and oil rigs and all this other stuff that give us the ability to tap into energy that has accumulated for millions and millions of years. And with that amount of energy, that's why we're able to have such a complex and advanced civilization. And to me, when you compare how we got so much energy from whales and whale oil, and then you see that we jumped over to fossil fuels, to me that's pretty much all that we need to see, that it's really all about the energy source, the energy density of the source of our energy. So tell me if you agree with me. Do you think that we're that advanced because of fossil fuels? To me, it just seems that there's no way we could be any different, and that once they're done, we'll be done. Of course, we can also jump over to solar now, and solar is a lot more sustainable than using, plants and animals that died millions of years ago and accumulated. And of course, there's that whole unfortunate thing with climate change. So give me your opinion anyway. You agree with me? Me or no?